Hello and welcome. This presentation is on the subject of bone graft materials and a new class of such materials under development. What are bone graft materials? Simply, they are materials used to extend, supplement, or even replace bone tissue. Bone graft materials may be naturally derived or synthetic. Why should one care about bone graft materials? Two numbers, 500,000 and 1.6 billion. 500,000 is the number of bone graft procedures performed in the U.S. every year. 1.6 billion is the dollar value of the materials used in those procedures. 500,000 is a lot of procedures. This is a large opportunity to make an impact on the lives of patients. 1.6 billion is a sizable market. Even a modest share in that market is a very attractive investment. The bone graft materials market is an established market. A dozen or so manufacturers operate within it. Numerous products are approved and in use. These products are based on decades-old technology. While useful, none of them adequately meet the needs of patients or surgeons. We can and will make a better material, one with improved patient outcome, one that is faster and easier to use for surgeons, one that ultimately results in lower costs. Who are the players in the bone graft materials market? Medtronic, Stryker, Zimmer, Wright Medical, J&J, MTF Synthes, and other smaller companies. We have touched on what bone graft material is, but when would one use it? Anytime a shortage of bone tissue occurs, whether from injury or disease. Fracture. Bone tissue may be crushed, splintered, or otherwise non-viable. Cancer. Bone tissue may be removed completely in the course of treatment. Spinal fusion surgery. Plastic reconstructive surgery. Orthopedic implants. All of these might call for the use of bone graft material. We may use bone graft material anytime a shortage of bone tissue occurs. But why? Why use this material? What does the material do? How does it benefit the patient? To answer this question, we need to know a little about how bone heals. Here we have a picture of a radial fracture. The radius is one of the two forearm bones, and fractures of the radius, either near the wrist, in which case they are distal radial fractures, or near the elbow, in which case they are proximal radial fractures, are one of the more common fractures encountered and an excellent example of where bone graft materials are used. You can see the fracture, those dark red lines. Note the gold-colored plate and the attaching screws. That is called a volar buttress for those who like to know such things. Between the two thick red lines you see a grayish material. This is our bone graft material. It may comprise any bits of bone salvaged from the patient, those bits not too crushed or mangled to be viable. But it also typically contains some type of bone graft material. Sometimes it is solely bone graft material. Bone itself is a matrix, a porous structure of hard mineral sponge-like columns mixed with living bone cells. When bone heals, as with the two ends of this fracture, the bone grows organically, layer upon layer. It heals from the edges inward. The bone cells don't know how large a gap they have to span, or the final shape that is needed. They just grow, piling on layers like rings of a tree, moving from the edge further and further until they run into something, ideally the advancing front of the other bone tissue. Because of this, bone tissue does not like to grow into a gap. If we do have gaps, they tend to fill with scar tissue instead of bone tissue. Scar tissue provides no structural support and can actually cut off any further healing. When that happens, and it does happen, a second surgery is required. The patient is cut open, the scar tissue scooped out, the bone edges scraped back, and the whole long, painful healing process has to start all over again. So the first thing a bone graft material has to do is fill. It needs to provide a nice, tight, fitting interface for the wound edges to grow into. The better the fill, the better, the faster, the more certain the healing. This is the most important thing that a bone graft material must do. But there are other properties that we would like our material to have. Encourage growth. The most important thing is to prevent scar tissue formation and provide a platform for new bone tissue to grow into. But why not actually encourage that growth while we are at it? For a bone to heal, the living bone cells have to be stimulated to build new bone tissue. The body must mobilize calcium and phosphate, transport it to the wound site, and only then can it be used for new bone tissue. Let's help our bone cells along and put a ready supply of these minerals right where it is needed. How about if we can stimulate those cells to work a little harder? To do this, we use bone morphogenic proteins. These are the chemical signals that tell our bone cells to build new tissue. Let's go ahead and put some of those in there too. With these two properties, filling and encouraging growth, we have a pretty good material. What else would we like our graft material to do? How about stabilize the wound site? Bone does not like to wiggle around when it is healing. A little bit of movement and you rip apart the newly formed bone layers. You stimulate the formation of scar tissue, and you make things even harder for our little bone cells to fix. This is why we have pins and rods and screws and volar buttresses. What if we had a material that not only filled, not only encouraged growth, but provided strength to the wound as well? A material that would bond to the bone edges and help hold them in place. Better healing, faster recovery, less risk of additional surgeries. Perhaps even eliminate the need for plates and pins and screws entirely. My thanks to the AO Foundation for the use of their image. Lots of great information on their webpage about orthopedic surgery and all things bone. Their address is www.aofoundation.org. In the last slide, we talked about what a bone graft material should do. Now let's talk about what current materials actually do and get a better understanding of the need. When one needs a bone graft, what is one likely to receive? The gold standard of bone grafting is an autograft. A patient's own bone tissue is harvested and then reimplanted. A typical harvest is shown here, where the iliac crest of the pelvis is exposed and a section of bone excised. This type of graft has the advantage of excellent biocompatibility, and there is no chance of disease transmission. However, there is a very limited supply of bone suitable for harvest, and one never knows when another graft might be needed. It does require a second surgery, performed simultaneously of the actual graft procedure. Though the outcome is generally good, it can depend on what type of bone is harvested. We have cancellous or spongy bone, and cortical or smooth bone. Cancellous bone heals well, but has very low strength. Cortical bone is stronger, but harder for the patient to incorporate back into new bone tissue. And you have to make sure the implant stays put, which is a problem as you are limited to using either a ground paste of bone or chunks and slivers wedged into place. This second surgery results in additional pain and stress on the patient, additional time in the OR, additional risk of infection and other complications. What are the alternatives? One can use allografts, donated human cadaver bone, or one can use xenografts, harvested animal bone. These suffer from all of the drawbacks of autograft bone, with few of the benefits other than a plentiful supply. One also has to contend with the biocompatibility of foreign materials and the possibility of disease transmission. One can use any number of synthetic bone graft materials. This is where the research is, and this is where our product will be. For these synthetic graft materials, the existing products have a difficult time matching the structure of the patient's native bone, and structure is important. The closer in structure to the patient's bone, the easier a time our bone cells have in growing into the graft and remodeling it into new bone tissue. Mixing of these graft material components is performed in the operating room, often from a combination of a powdered material and a liquid material placed into a vessel and mixed by hand. This severely limits the structure that can be obtained to very simple forms. It also compromises the sterility of the material. Where a material does have a structure approaching that of native bone, then the fit or bonding to adjacent bone is lacking. These may be chunks or blocks of material packed into a bone cavity. Recall that the tighter the fit, the better the bone ingrowth, and the lesser the chance of scar tissue formation. A better product is needed. A better material, were one able to come up with such a thing, would be moldable to fit closely to the wound cavity, be pre-made, no more pouring and measuring in the OR, it should be ready to implant right out of the package, sterile, and with a defined microstructure mimicking that of natural bone tissue. Provide controlled release of bone growth promoters, able to bond to adjacent bone, and able to provide strength and reinforcement. A new technology now allows a curable bone graft material, a material that is malleable, allowing a close fit to the patient's own bone tissue, then curing, hardening, and bonding to that bone. This material is stable at refrigerated temperatures, even room temperatures. The graft material only cures when warmed to a patient's body temperature, and the technology results in an inherently porous microstructure, which is most conducive to bone tissue growth. The technology under development and the subject of this presentation offer several advantages over products and treatments already in use. It allows a defined microstructure, yet a moldable adhesive form. It can be formulated with differing viscosities, from a malleable putty to an injectable liquid. The degree of porosity can be adjusted. The product can be tailored into multiple different product lines. It allows the integration of structural and bone growth stimulating materials. It allows the creation of new proprietary graft materials with improved bonding, biodegradability, and with controlled release of growth factor. Our product is a development stage material. Work will be required to bring it to market. This is a proposal with some risk, but there are strategies that we can use to ensure our success. The first strategy that we would use is the FDA 510(k) clearance pathway. This is where we take an existing product, an existing material, one which is already on the market, approved for use. There are several classes of bone graft materials or tissue adhesives from which we might choose. We further choose a material from which the patent protection has expired, and recalling that many use decades-old technology, again, we have many from which to choose. We take a material, we add them to our technology, the controlled activation. We make them more useful, allowing new indications, protein aldehydes, polyethylene glycols, collagen, varied polysaccharides, bone morphogenic proteins. We based our first product around one or more of these. This removes most of the regulatory heavy lifting and allows us to get a product to market and establish a revenue stream to fund further development. Once we have a revenue stream in place, the technology allows new proprietary materials to be developed, materials which have never been. We have touched on the limitations of the current products, and we have talked about the advantages our new technology offers. But how does it work? Our patent-pending technology is simple and suitable for use with multiple different formulations. Begin with a polymerizable, cross-linkable, curable substance. Take the requisite curing agent, Encapsulate particles of the curing agent within a temperature-sensitive shell. Disperse the encapsulated curing agent within the curable substance. Refrigerate until implantation. Simple, robust, but never done before. The technology is new, but it uses proven science. The material can be manufactured using conventional equipment and facilities with minor modification. Recall the first slide and the size of the market. 500,000 bone graft procedures annually in the U.S. Double that worldwide. 1.6 billion in sales for the graft material alone. A typical graft dosage sells for $1,000 to $2,000 hospital price. Newer, more advanced materials are on the upper end of that, even beyond. Cost of goods sold for our material estimated at less than $100 per dose unit. A business plan is available going in. Our product is a development stage material. Work will be required to bring it to market. Areas that need to be explored: the strength of the different formulations, adhesion, how strong a bond can be obtained, optimal formulations, strength, adhesion, porosity, growth promoters, rate of resorption, viscosity, etc. If the formulation can be made strong enough, the target market of bone cements opens up. The bone cement market is... Finally, we have focused on bone graft materials as it appears to be the easiest and quickest to market. The technology is flexible though, and has the potential to allow other products in other markets, that of wound closure, hernia and other soft tissue repair, dural sealants, transcutaneous implant sealants. These products and markets are feasible and might even surpass the bone graft materials market, but research and development would be required to make any further claims. Thank you for your interest and your time. A business plan is available as well as our published intellectual property. For copies and to discuss licensing or investment in this exciting new class of materials, an email should be sent to dnolen@nolenortho.com. Again, dnolen@nolenortho.com. Thank you.